housing. And so we're so glad to convene our next conversation on decolonizing wealth and economic reconciliation. But as always, we like to begin things by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we are on. We acknowledge all of our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. My name is Julissa Brown, and I'm the founder of Funding Impact, where we're focused on supporting BIPOC entrepreneurs with investment readiness. And I'm so glad to have a bunch of panelists today that are really going to give you some wealth of knowledge as we talk about decolonizing wealth. And so I would love for our panelists to just introduce themselves and let all of us know about your amazing work. So perhaps we can start with you, Jonah.
Awesome. Thanks, Yulisa. Hi, everyone. My name is Jonah Chininga, and the co-founder and CEO of Wovio. We are a community-based financing platform based out in.
Thanks, Jonah. We're glad to have you here. Tiffany, good day. It's nice to see you.
Great. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are, kind of joining us in the conference. My name is Tiffany Calendar, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of the Federation of African Canadian Economics, where we manage a $160 million loan fund for Black entrepreneurs. It's a historic fund and program for Canada. And we've developed this program to really put Black people who have an invested interest in where investments go in our community for a larger objective and goal of building wealth for people of African descent in this country. I am a 23-year nonprofit executive, meaning I've been doing this, started when I was 2, and I really like the work that is being done across Canada.
And Jonah, and big thank you to Setsi in particular for putting this on. I am a manager of systems change and social innovation, social finance at SVX, an impact investing firm, but I'm also coming today in the capacity of an organizer and co-founder with the Palestine Impact Collective, which actually is a collective of more than 70 different impact growing every day professionals from across Turtle Island that have essentially come together because we've noticed a lack of conversation and action in the sector around stopping an active colonial project, actively engage in decolonization and liberation for all people. And I'm so grateful to be on a panel today that joins together Indigenous, Black, Palestinian, and other solidarities together because we are definitely stronger together. I'm happy to chat more about this amazing collective and the work that we're doing, particularly on divestment and investment, but also general philanthropy. And I'll pass it back to you, Jalissa.
Perfect. Thank you, Paula. I totally agree. We are stronger together. Now, last but not least, let's say hello to Shannon.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity. I think I've been on this panel before. So my name is Shannon Macharawaban. Shannon Mataftovan, Dishnakasan Bitabu Noshin. It's good to know it's being quite chip, I'm the CEO for the National Aboriginal Capital Corporations. It's an association that's about 28 years old, but our network and our members are about 40 years old, providing business loans to Indigenous entrepreneurs from coast to coast to coast. They've provided about $3.3 billion in lending to about 53,000 loans, and we're just continuing to grow. We recently launched an Indigenous Growth Fund as part of the Social Finance Fund program that the government instituted, but we were well ahead of when they actually rolled it out. So we actually created it as a sustainable fund that can raise private sector capital, leverage that capital, and help our members with loans that they can in turn give to our community. I'm also the founder of 3IC. It's the Indigenous Impact Investment Circle. So this is an intermediary to connect market capital to Indigenous projects, mostly major projects, housing, infrastructure type of projects. It's creating a trust circle to ensure that market capital understands Indigenous communities and Indigenous communities understands market capital and the types and variants and the risks that are associated with different people in the market. So this is where I come from, and I look forward to connecting capital amongst Indigenous people around the world. Thank you.
Perfect. I'm already hearing really great themes of decolonizing wealth for our communities. And so I'm so glad to dive in. And maybe I can throw it back to you for the first question, Shannon. And that is, what is the most rewarding part of your work currently?
I think the most rewarding part, and so I used to be a business officer, so I used to actually provide financing more than 25 years ago. That was my first career. And what I did in the interim is I took a couple of other careers along the path that returned me back to this network. And I got to say that there's no better satisfaction than helping your own people succeed and seeing the smiles on their faces as they start a new business opportunity. Because what we found is that for an Indigenous person that starts a business, and this probably applies to everybody, 72% increase in life satisfaction, 52% increase in mental health indicators, and 20% increase in health indicators. So people become healthier, happier, and being plugged into the economy makes the whole community successful. So that's really my joy.
Yeah, I love that. And I wonder how in the social finance world across Canada, we're going to be able to continue to use these social impacts like and points of well-being to measure the impact that's being created. And so I would love to hear from you next, Jonah. What is the most rewarding part of your work currently?
Yeah, so I think for me it's definitely one is the impact. I think delivering the impact to our members and users is something that we're really passionate about. We are a platform that serves over 10,000 underserved individuals who are typically not served by traditional banks. So that's kind of like a key element, which is part of our mission. But I think secondly, it's a mission that we have in terms of how do we get people from underserved communities to participate in capital inflows. I think that's kind of like one thing because one of the biggest issues that affect, even if you look at it from a wealth inequality perspective, is the cost of borrowing, right? You see that there's a high cost of borrowing whenever you're trying to access capital. That capital can become a burden instead of something to be able to build wealth. So we're always trying to be able to recreate those models so that people can get sustainable capital to be able to build themselves. So that
Beautiful. I mean, I know all about Ovio and what you have going on, but I'm excited for everyone else to learn a little bit more throughout this session. Now, Tiffany, where did the reward show up for you in your work?
Well, I think I would echo everything that was said before us. It's really working for your community and knowing intimately their needs, their challenges, it's a shared life experience that actually feeds into the work, that moves it beyond just repeating structures or systems that are not effective and are not able to meet us where we are. But I think a big part of the work that we do that is also rewarding, it's the opportunity to educate, inform, upskill entrepreneurs to understand the system that we're in. No matter what we create at this time, we are all moving towards and strive to have a new, different economy. But there's a transition in that. And in the interim, as my mom would say, you have to sometimes crawl before you walk and then you run. And I think that learning to navigate the system and knowing that it is not some kind of impossible structure, and by creating these systems that we have to be able to not only have the opportunity to learn, it's also to have the opportunity, the market capital that's there, and vice versa. This education is required because there's a system in and around what we are trying to build as Indigenous, independent, autonomous peoples who are trying to say this system doesn't work. It's been built to block us out. It has created more harm than help to people who look different to the status quo or to the accepted quo, I would say. But the ability to empower folks to say, that's a boogeyman. You do not have to be scared of it. You can understand it. You can circumvent it in the interim and then become an actual participant, an active participant in building a different economy that removes barriers because we just won't build that way. So I think that that's been the most rewarding part of my work, is that there was so many blinders to our community and thinking like, oh, I'll never have that, or it's impossible, I can never have access. And it's like, no, we've created out the extreme and blatant exclusion of some. That's the difference, and that's been rewarding.
Yeah, I love that, Tiffany. Now, Paula, what about you? What's most rewarding in your work?
Honestly, it's been obviously a very difficult year with everything happening in Gaza and in Palestine. And throughout it all, the most rewarding part, though, the silver lining is collective, we came together mostly due to a dissonance in not seeing the change within a sector where we devoted our career towards working with impact, anti-oppressive frameworks, and just coming together and essentially putting that change forward. And I think another great part of it is that throughout the year, throughout all the work, it's developed a stronger sense of justice and reaffirmed the reasons why we're in this space to begin with. It percolates into everything and makes our conviction stronger to build better economic systems, better resilient systems, and to truly understand how to show up for different communities in solidarity with different communities, um, and to understand why it is that we really do this work and what it actually means to be in community. Um, Similar to Tiffany's point that I also really reflect on, and like what's really interesting about working in this context in diaspora, in Canada, and globally also is that we are essentially trying to dismantle a system that actually is actively built to suppress and for us not to succeed. And so we have the luxury of coming together and being able to imagine from scratch what a system could look like that would actually be anti-colonial, decolonial, focus on justice and equity, centering culture, centering a lot of the trades that are inherent to our peoples, such as agriculture, fishery, ancient traditions. And so describe having the world discover and learn more about our culture and vice versa has been really beautiful because you can see the intertwining systems being built in real time and imagine what a post-colonial economy and system could look like. So genuinely that imagination and the stronger sense of justice is what I would say is the most rewarding.
Thanks, Paula. Now, I know that there must be challenges that are faced along the way. And I know that in recent months, Tiffany, we were able to see your advocacy in the news.
Well, I think that's what Jaleesa was maybe alluding to. So our program, the BEP, is up for renewal. So this is a part of the landscape of whenever you're dealing with government funding. You do deal with renewals. I've been in this for more than 20 years, so that's not uncommon. What we are facing right now is the very uncertain, unprecedented political landscape and changes that we're seeing around a new government coming in, which I want to say I've navigated that before in my career. The pendulum of politics swings, from to different sides, and you definitely end up having to kind of present your work in a way in which it resonates with the fundamental philosophy of different parties. So there's a lot of re-educating of the system all the time. But in this case, we have something that is, never been seen before. A prorogation or resignation of a prime minister. All of these things are happening simultaneously during the renewal process. We were successful in being named in the fall economic statement, 189 million over 5 years to renew the BEP. That was a heavy lift. Shannon is nodding because I think he aligns with me. He knows what that process is like. But now we're at a different stage where with the changes we're seeing in government now the advocacy changes and it shifts. But these things are just more fuel to understand that we have to use this as a stepping stone to get to somewhere. I am going to take a moment just to say one of the other opportunities that I think of learning and growth that we have as decolonized peoples and communities that are coming together to build economies is learning across from FACE and a loan fund supported by the Canadian government is not even new. NACA started in exactly that place 30 plus years ago with an investment of $25 million. We started off with an investment of $30 million from the Canadian government. And now look at what the Indigenous community has done. not only manage that fund, got into billions of dollars that was loaned, built different types of vehicles to be able to allow access to the growing number of Indigenous companies that are moving from probably small corporations, that those who have now scaled and have become big companies that are employing Indigenous people. So I say all of that to say, although there's the challenge of, yes, being supported by government, the change in the political landscape, ensuring that we're able to find the resources to move and continue to move our project forward in its inception years. We're only 3 years old. I can't help but be inspired to look at NACA and look at the Indigenous Growth Fund and look at everything that Shannon is a part of, because he only mentioned 3 today. But all of this tells me that there is a road forward, and where we really gain as decolonized groups and trying to fight against a system that isn't set up for us to win, is to look at what has worked for other communities. So that knowledge transfer and finding those commonalities shortens my road in leadership as for the Black community, by looking at what NACA has done and what other groups have done. So there's challenges, but then there's always, if you lift your head up away from the problems and the challenges, you can find your pathway forward, because there's groups that have done this and that can reach out. And you can, and if you're smart, you'll reach out and try to get connection, and then eventually advocate together.
That's absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much for your leadership and all those actionable insights. So Shannon, in terms of a very similar question, you did some incredible work around the social innovation, social finance strategy, a carve out of $50 million, scaled exponentially. What are some of the challenges and barriers in your work?
To that question. So we've been at this for 40 years. It definitely takes time, but as Tiffany says, eventually we'll get there. Well, we've laid a foundation. We've had some ups and downs, and we still have challenges today, I've got to say. We're trying to roll out mentorship. It's going to be our next challenge, making sure that we're connecting with existing entrepreneurs so they can help new entrepreneurs. That has got its some risks, some challenges of finding people, connecting people online, chat. That's one where we maybe can work together on. Just providing information to our community. We might be working with Face and Happily and their nice robust system that'll connect our community. We have a physical hub for our entrepreneurs, and I think it's a really important thing, because what we found is our entrepreneurs absolutely love it. They find that it's a very isolating and lonely place to be an entrepreneur, but if you give them that space, then they can work together, they can grow together, they can accelerate and incubate. We launched a foundation. It's very important to create a foundation for yourselves, because that's a whole new set of philanthropic giving. Procurement is a big one. You have to take control of that space, otherwise the entities that are in that space right now want to control it. They want to dictate who gets what, and we're finding that the government is set up with a lot of people that are pretending to be Indigenous to get into positions of government in order to dictate who gets what within government, and they have their own pretend people obtaining procurement opportunities. So that's why you got to start at the very beginning to make sure that you're recognizing your citizens. And this is what the process we're on. You might have seen me in the news speaking out against this whole phenomenon of pretend Indianism. I think that's the word it is. So I call it fraud. And I'm advocating for people to be barred from obtaining any procurement from the government if they've pretended to be an Indian. We have challenges with bonding and insurance to make sure our entrepreneurs can actually take that next step and expand people. And we're going to be doing an environmental scan of all the programs and services and tools that are out there, because we have 58 plus coast to coast to coast, and each of them operate independently. We try to connect them, but some of them are doing some great things. We just want to bring a platform to share all these great things for everybody to benefit. So that's kind of the trajectory that we're on. And thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Shannon. And I'm glad to be back after some tech difficulties. Thanks, folks. Now, Paula, I would love to know what are some of the key challenges that you have faced while working towards decolonizing wealth?
Welcome back, Jalissa. Um, yes, there's definitely a ton of challenges. I think as Palestinians, the Palestinian community and allies, we face intense active suppression, media bias, and silencing, as well as doxing and bullying when it comes to general advocacy for Palestinian liberation or human rights, but also especially when it comes to any type of work in the economic arena and in the financial arena. It is a very difficult space, and it does often feel like we are building systems in real time that do not yet exist. Um, to build up a Palestinian social economy and also an economy of solidarity globally in diaspora. It's an interesting landscape because when you're working in diaspora in countries that are actively complicit in a colonial project like Canada, the US, other governments where corporations, the private sector, the investments in technology and surveillance and military arms are all contributing to this. It is a very intricate network of organizations to target and um, challenges to address. In general, also within the philanthropic space, I will say that to the earlier point of active suppression, silencing, and anti-Palestinian racism, it is difficult to even bring up the conversation, like step one, to even talk about it. There have been a lot of cases of grantees and other organizations that have put forward statements or have shown their solidarity with Palestine that been have lost funding, have lost donor support within Canada. And so, great things that some philanthropic organizations have done is talk to their grantees and say, we will not rescind funding. You are safe if you are willing to speak up. A lot of these organizations are Indigenous, other racialized organizations, and they are being penalized for their solidarity. And we cannot continue being in an ecosystem where donor pressure and essentially wealth holder pressure is directing how organizations go about their own activities. So that's one thing from a philanthropic perspective. And another as well, just in general, within the investment and divestment arena, it's having people understand how, without even willing, sometimes even impact investors, your dollars very much are funding war, and really needing to get into and understanding how to look at your portfolio to see whether it's an ETF that has exposure to the occupation and war, whether it is investment into real estate that is furthering the illegal occupation of the West Bank. There are so many different things, and sometimes it does feel overwhelming to understand and to do that analysis of your portfolio. There are amazing organizations that are currently doing work to identify and support people who are wanting to align their portfolios with true impact and to make sure that they're not contributing to that. Connect with the Palestine Impact Collective here in Canada. Adesina Social Capital in the US is doing amazing work on human rights lens investing. But in general, there are these coalitions forming to hopefully address some of those challenges. Um, and I think in Canada, my message would also just generally be to if you feel any type of apprehension when it comes to looking at your portfolio or even speaking up for this, then that's kind of a question that we have to ask ourselves. What type of status quo are we upholding? Are we okay with um, just this passivity? And I think a lot of the times, I think a lot of our sector falls into that. And we have to really be brave and stand into these different grassroots language that we use and to actually live it instead of being performative, to actually work in accordance to our values. So that's some of what I'll mention for this, Jalissa. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Paula. I really appreciate what you said about breaking the silence and ensuring that we are working within our values. Now, Jonah, I know with doing things differently in social finance, of course, you would run against some challenges. So what might those be?
Yeah, so for us, I think it's because we operate within a private sector. So the challenges varies. I'll put them into three buckets. I think the first one is technology adoption. There's one piece whereby you want to use technology as a way to bridge access, but I think there's a gap with literacy. So we're always trying to find ways of how can we be able to simplify the products that we're building. So for those who are not aware, with what we do, we're a community financing platform where we enable communities to leverage their own capital or savings as a way to gain access to credit using different mechanisms, all the way from the SUSU models to rotating savings and then now into lending. So enabling communities to be able to leverage that. So there's a technology gap that we see in terms of how do we educate community members to be able to leverage these tools in a way that is understandable and easy for them to use. I think that's the first piece. The second one is capital partnerships. I think right now, just given the current microeconomic conditions, there are different things that we're looking at in terms of how to bridge capital partnerships. And unfortunately, I think within the Canadian ecosystem, I think there's a level of risk taking that needs to come into play, but which the appetite I don't think is there in Canada. So I think that's something that we need to push for if we want to be able to deliver true impact in terms of how do we increase our risk models, how do we reimagine how we quantify those things just to be able to provide sustainable capital into the communities that need it the most. And then the last one is definitely political uncertainty. I think for us, we work with individuals as well as micro entrepreneurs, and a lot of them are really worried about the tariffs, especially if you're doing cross-border businesses. I think that's a huge impact that's affecting a lot of them, as well as immigration and uncertainty in terms of the policy perspective, right? We do also work with immigrants who are probably entrepreneurs. And then right now, if you are a temporary resident in Canada and you're trying to obtain a loan, it's almost impossible because there's that uncertainty of how long are you going to stay in Canada. So those are different factors that are affecting one from an underserved perspective, but then also two from a macroeconomic perspective that we're looking to be able to work around.
Okay, very interesting. We don't often hear about, the issues that the newcomers might come across. Thanks for sharing, Jonah. Now, all of your organizations have, proposed solutions and models to decolonizing wealth. I want to know from each of you, do you feel that these solutions are understood and known in Canada, or is there still a lot of capacity building, required for this to happen? And maybe you can let us know what communities you feel are still being left behind. Let's start with you, Paula.
For sure. I think there is a lot to be done, to my previous points, for folks to understand, why is somebody talking about Palestine even on this panel? Why and how can we integrate Palestine within our conversations of decolonization and anti-oppression? And even with systems within Canada, how can we understand the ways that we all participate as institutions, as institutional investors, individual investors, general professionals in the sector, to occupation, and how can we actively learn, inform ourselves, and move towards living more according to our values and impact. And so the systems in place are getting organized as it's happening. It's an active colonial project happening. And so there's active organizing and very much a lot of grassroots mobilizing. And you can see that in all different realms. If you are following, you can see that within the corporate space, within the political realm, within social impact, within charities. These are all active conversations that are evolving, and people's understandings have evolved over the last year and continue to evolve as people are mobilizing towards understanding what is our collective power and what's our individual power in enacting change, and what institutions do we need to build to further our goals. And I would reflect a lot on how there is precedent for this. There's tons of precedents in history of how communities have come together to push to fight for their own liberation and create better conditions and then build better economic resilience for themselves. I was actually at a talk on South African apartheid yesterday, and from organizers from that era, talking about how they were fighting for an end to apartheid, but that in itself was actually not enough of a call for the South African context, and full liberation would be better. Because if you look at the South African context right now, there is still a lot of economic injustice at play. And this is the same thing that we're thinking about here. And also, we are learning from examples of people that have been organizing for years in all realms, such as South African organizers who did amazing work. And they were the ones that put in place boycott, divest, sanction, that brought together collective power to essentially enact pressure, eventually for state systems to then change and put sanctions to have apartheid fall in South Africa. And a big part of that was the investment realm as well, and economically. Um, Understanding what corporations, what products to boycott, what to divest from, how it was present in different portfolios. And so using those lessons and applying them to the Palestinian context, building out, as Wayne shared in the chat, different tools that help you as an individual retail investor to see how you are exposed to this as institution, foundations, charities, anyone with any type of assets. How are you exposed to? At the Palestine Impact Collective, we're trying to build a coalition of impact-aligned investors who want to include a Palestine lens within their practice. And so we encourage people to reach out to us and to talk to us about that. And there are amazing organizations. I think one big problem is that we're working a lot of the times in silos because of this environment of suppression and fear. And there is always a massive call and need for us to convene together and collaborate. And we are at the Palestine Impact Collective, myself, always so open to all these connections. And this is why we're always happy to connect to other communities, not just people advocating for Palestinian liberation, but just in general, working in economic resilient systems, because we can learn from each other and walk together towards such a better, thriving future for communities that have been historically marginalized and continue to be marginalized. Hopefully that addressed your question.
Totally, Paula. Full liberation is required. I'd agree. Now, Tiffany, what are your thoughts?
I think Paula did an amazing job answering that question. She went from a macro to a micro. The only thing that I would add is that when we think about who's left out, which is what you said, who is still left out from these concepts and movements and everything else, I think that there is, at the baseline, and the work that I've done, which has been socioeconomic, I've worked on not just economic strategies, but general, I call them Gen Pop programs in terms of connecting with different demographics within the community. I think the reason why often people get left out in movements that are made to benefit a particular group, so we design to benefit a particular group, but there's still people who kind of left on the margins or sometimes in the not knowing, is because there has to be a valiant effort around understanding what it is to be actively involved in the change that you want to see. I think one of the biggest elements or core parts of this system that is oppressive and that has really locked us into place, almost like frozen us, is that we don't really understand that we are there's an active charge in being involved in the change. And it doesn't mean that it has to be on some high, intricate, complex role that we're playing. What Paul is saying, which is important, is that when that messaging went through to resonate with South Africans, to pull them into what can you do, but then also went out to the world and said, what can you do? My cousins told me, my older cousin, they remember when that movement was happening for Mandela's liberation and what it was to say, we're not buying these products. We're not, we're going to challenge our universities. We're going to do those things. You're folks in the States. And it's that part that you have to understand, that your little determined, disciplined action does have it's very hard to believe, because we feel very small, and the system is made to make you feel small, alone, and not powerful. The reverse is actually true. So if it's like, I'm not buying those socks from that place, that discipline to say no, and then having the intelligence to move your resources to a company or a place where they are aligned with your values, that's sometimes what gets lost. And I think when you have people engaged on that level of, I'm a powerful little entity in a bigger strategy, then I think it's very hard to get left behind. It's very hard. I think once those neurons start transmitting that way in your mind, it becomes a different ball game, not just as an individual, but with the collective. So a lot of the work that I used to do before FACE was, what is the knowing of yourself? What is the knowing of who you are and what you want and how you're going to show up in this world? Because, or actively be involved. But trust me, the latter is better. Be involved. And then eventually you can weigh out how it's going to help you. So I'm completely aligned with Paula's thoughts, and I hope that that helped. But I think we often deal with strategy when we also have to deal with the centering of ourselves, and then strategy can really amplify and magnify.
That's super important. And then it's like, if we are not moving as, one entity within a larger strategy, you are still moving, but what side are you moving with? What decision are you making to move forward and support? So thanks for those points, Tiffany. Jonah, I wonder what you're thinking about if Canada is really understanding the solutions and models to decolonizing wealth and who else could be left behind.
Perspective to how we can be able to drive change. I think one of the things is if you look at case studies, like what are there any communities that we can look at as a case study in terms of how they came from being underserved to being developed? I think that's kind of like one way I like to look at things. And a good example that I've seen is the story of like the French immigrants when they came in the early 1900s, how they were able to establish Desjardins, the banking system that they built within the community, the French community in Quebec, and then how that is transformed in terms of like access to education, access to entrepreneurship, those tools that actually enable people to build wealth. I think those are practical solutions. But then for you to be able to develop and deploy something like that, it takes decades. So I think having a perspective of how long those changes take to implement and having patient capital that's willing to be able to drive that journey to be able to deliver those results. For my experiences, I think the three best ways that people can be able to actually reinvent and redefine themselves is literally community-based financial institutions. I think that's a key pillar that any community needs to be able to move forward, whether we're using the frameworks of credit unions, community banks. I think it's really key because sometimes you end up having communities whereby they are structured with just pawn shops, payday loans, and then those high cost products. That community is going to be stuck in a cycle of poverty without actually sustainable development. And then the second one, I think we also need to look at it from a grassroots level, education. I think education is also a key part of this conversation. How are we enabling the young people within those underserved communities to gain access to actually quality education? When we're talking about the AI, right? That's kind of like the theme right now. How are we getting our young kids to be involved in those conversations, to be leveraging those programs so that they have the skills and are not left behind and then they can be the bridge between generations? I think there's a key element in terms of how policymakers and leaders within the community can be able to take part in those conversations. And I think the last one is entrepreneurship. We live in a capitalistic society. That's kind of like the structure that we're in. And then entrepreneurship is that provides that pathway to ownership, and then ownership provides in terms of how you can be able to dictate capital, because it's harder to be able to deploy capital if you don't control it. That's just the unfortunate truth. So how do we become controllers and owners of that capital so we can be able to drive it and put it into the things that we care about? Because if we have it more within the community, we can be able to solve different problems and different issues without just having high reliance on government. So I think those are some of the ways that we can be able to look at how can we be able to use historical successes to inspire future developments.
Perfect. Thank you for those insights, Jonah. What are your thoughts, Shani?
Well, I think the goal is to transfer wealth because we're all colonized. We've gone through hundreds of years of colonization, and it's all with the goal to get our land to get rid of us, but we're still here. And now if we're decolonizing, we're basically talking about transferring that wealth to our communities. And it won't happen overnight. It's taken hundreds of years to colonize us and get us to where we are. My dad's always said it's going to take some time to get us back to where we're going to be prosperous again. But we're taking active steps to get there. And I think understanding our impact in the current economy is a good place to start. Having a good leakage study of your community, knowing where the opportunities are. You can definitely talk about places where you want to boycott purchasing, but where is our community spending money right now? And where is the opportunity our communities can create businesses or initiatives to jointly work together? Housing is a good opportunity. We need. I like the comment about a banking system. I think that we should almost have a decolonized bank where we're actively connecting each other to a banking system, because you need a banking system in order to help our community. And it's all about the cost of capital. It's all about the cost of what sort of interest rates our people are being charged. I want to work with FACE and others on maybe changing policy and government in Canada to ensure that our people aren't taken advantage of. Right now, it's a wild west with interest rates on credit cards, on payday loans, and all these things that it's not helping our communities get ahead at all. So we have to actively work to decolonize the legislation and the policies that government has a stranglehold on us. And once we are able to unlock and decolonize policies to ensure that we can actively maneuver in the economy, then we'll have an opportunity to participate. And then the last one I wanted to outline is investment, getting our people to start thinking about investing. I know that in the Indigenous community, our community is basically survival, right, on a daily basis. Once certain ones are able to get out of that survival, then they start thinking about a future. So they start thinking about businesses and other things. But to actually think in the long term, that's investments. And if we can change and begin the capacity development for investments, then those other steps seem a little bit closer together.
Thanks, Shannon. I think you bring up a really good point there and, coming together as communities to help change policy. So, I wonder if you were able to make changes to any sort of legislation, what would those changes be? And perhaps, what could the call to action be for governments and investors uh, related to decolonizing wealth across Canada?
I don't know. I think the call to action really is us getting together to sort of understand what is the environment of what are the colonial policies that are right now being subjected against us. I have a good idea for the Indigenous community because we have an actual act called the Indian Act, and it prevents us from doing a lot of things. And they've always amended it to ensure that anytime we're getting ahead, that they put us back in our place. So we're trying to actively rid ourselves of that act while ensuring that we have the protections that we currently have to ensure that we retain our rights and title to their land, because that was the original intent. It was a sharing of the land, and there hasn't been much sharing. But policies that I'd like to look at that we can jointly work together on, I think are in the financial sector, like the whole interest rates. I think that's the Wild West, and I think that we have an opportunity to jointly come together because our collective anyways for capital for other programs and services. This would be a big impact in the community, and it's one that I'd like to see and work together on.
Totally. Would any of our other panelists like to comment on this question?
Yeah, I can probably just add one. I think one other thing that I also think about is how can we potentially grow the pie? And then from a policy perspective, I'm a big believer in terms of Canada. So there's internal solutions, but I think there's also external solutions. How can Canada as a country, as a nation, be able to reimagine its trading partners, especially with what's happening right now? The Canada-African trade relationship, I think that's something that can be able to drive looking at our population, our demographics, I think we can be able to leverage more economic activities to places that we've never really participated. So I think that's a huge opportunity that from a policy perspective, I think we can be able to take.
Okay, I would love to know from each of our panelists, what are some upcoming initiatives or projects that you would like to amplify with our attendees? Let's start with Tiffany.
But one of the projects that I like to amplify that is going to be announced by FACE, it's the second, I guess you would say, cohort of our Propelling Black Entrepreneurship program. It was a very successful program that was supported by TD. And the idea was, again, around helping entrepreneurs to build their capacity around their business, understanding their business, working with professionals from their community to become finance ready. I think that there's always the work around, yes, making sure that on our side, we're able to have the capital and the access piece, but it's also making sure that our entrepreneurs are away a lot of the jargon and a lot of the terminology that locks them away or creates this kind of idea that you don't know how your business works, or you can't kind of develop a full strategy and understanding of how you're going to move your business forward. And that's what I love the most about this program. So that'll be launching. So we have another 2 years. So that would be 4 that we've been able to help entrepreneurs to get finance ready and move from concept or operations to now access to capital through our program and others. So that's coming up shortly. You'll hear the announcement in.
We appreciate you for your insights and perspectives in this space. Shannon, would love to hear any upcoming initiatives or projects that you like to amplify, and maybe your closing thoughts also.
Thank you very much. Some of the new things that I've been actively trying to create this organization. It's called the First Nations Procurement Authority. In our communities, we need to create our own institutions. There's no paternal system that will ever take care of us the way that we can take care of ourselves. So you really need to create these systems. And it's taking me, about 5 years, 6 years of advocacy, still trying to get the government on board, but we're going to be moving ahead on our own, having the corporate community support, accessing our 30,000 businesses that we have in our database, giving them authentic Indigenous people, youth, broadband. That's something that we just started, and we're going to be working with FACE on an online hub. So this is going to be an ecosystem where our Indigenous people can enter and go through their learning journey, be referred to financing, be referred to the type of industry that they're going to door entry, so that they can have all the information all in one place. So that's a couple of things that I wanted to highlight. And I just want to thank Victor and Lisa for this opportunity. To the panelists, Paula and Jonah, thank you very much. And for anybody else that is on the call that has an idea of tools that exist out there that would benefit our community, please share them. I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jalissa. Tons of different initiatives. It's really hard to narrow. I think I'll speak from some of my various hats. I don't even like to use that term because we're just individuals. We do so many different things. Earlier point about communities needing to own their own capital to truly change systems. That's the work that I'm focused on right now. So I'm excited about connecting to funds that directly give the governance of those dollars to communities, intersectional economic work. And that's really exciting to me. And I'm always looking to connect to folks that are thinking about these same questions. But also on another front, in terms of moving forward and trying to actively get people to participate and understand how they can support our movement and build solidarity. There's a divestment campaign that the Palestine Impact Collective is currently conducting. We want to work with impact investors, charities that have funds, and other asset owning institutions that want to essentially do an audit of their portfolio to see how they're exposed to the occupation in Palestine. And to also put together both that first divestment piece, working together and building a campaign to jointly make a commitment towards divesting. And secondly, as well, to identify opportunities for reinvestments. To Tiffany's earlier point, it's not just about taking money away, it's also about where do we put it? As Shannon said as well, where do we put it to better build the community? Where are people spending their dollars? How can we have this thriving, prosperous solidarity economy? And so if you want to stay in contact, we are at PalestineImpactCollective.org. We're also on LinkedIn. We will be putting together later in the year a list of different impact investing opportunities that can help rebuild key infrastructure in Palestine that connects diaspora to other communities. We are also wanting to build this list in general for Indigenous investment opportunities across Turtle Islands and different Indigenous peoples across the world, including communities in essentially in all places that are facing these same issues. And so that's something that I'm really excited to put together and to share out because there's so much to be done, but there's also so much amazing, brilliant people putting their minds, their efforts, their time, and their wallets towards this. So those are some things that I would look out for um, from our end. I would also say that there was a really great report put out in the US by Funding Freedom around how to essentially act as a philanthropic actor that can support this work in a very just and aligned way. So I'll leave you with those three things, but I have an endless list in my mind.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing, Paula. And Jonah, anything you would like to leave with our audience today?
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. I think something that a new initiative that for us at Wobio we're launching this year, really looking to be part of the solution. Is we started as a community financing platform, and this year we're expanding into lending because we have a big mission on reducing the cost of borrowing. I think it's a big part of our mission. So we're going to start for us with a $10 million fund that we're launching and eventually growing into 100 million. And what's different about this is for us, we're not leveraging traditional credit scores. We're actually doing something different by leveraging social collateral. So this is something that we have done over the past 4 years, an effective model that has actually proven to have higher repayment rates than the traditional credit risk model. So working with different partners to be able to prove out that thesis, because I don't believe that credit should be costing people more than 18%. I think that should be the cap, and we should always look for ways to be able to leverage that. So we're starting with that, working with micro entrepreneurs to start with loans of up to $10,000, trying to be able to provide affordable solutions, and then scaling that as we work with different organizations. So that's a new initiative that we're launching this year, and super excited about that. Other than that, no, thank you for having me. I think this was a great conversation. It's much needed, it's timely, and I think we need to be able to reinvent how things are done to be able to drive true impact. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jonah, Shannon, Paula, and Tiffany, for your brilliance that you've brought to this panel today. We really got to dive deep into decolonizing wealth. And this is a conversation that we don't often get to have as people of color and marginalized communities. And so we appreciate you for your brilliance. And folks, for watching, we also thank you for joining us for another session. We will be jumping together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. See you all again soon. Thank you. Bye.